Let's get started by I'm give a little bit of a welcome message to Bill Reichert. Thank you so much for giving this honor to come become a guest speaker for this workshop on the topic, the future of innovation, lessons from Silicon Valley for corporate investor. So a little bit about Bill Reichert. Bill Reichert is a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures, a global venture capital firm that based in Silicon Valley that is focused on making strategic investment in high-tech startups and connecting them with the Pegasus network of over 30 corporate limited partners. Bill has been part of Pegasus investment team that has invested in over 100 companies, including SpaceX, 23andMe, Bird, and Robinhood. Today, Bill will talking about the future of innovation, and if you want to learn it in that uh, apart from his experience, feel free to type the question in the chat box or at the end that during the Q&A session. And so please give a big round of applause to Bill Record.
Wild
Yes.
applause, right? Great. Okay, Cindy, let me share my screen, and we'll get going. Okay. Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, great. All right, excellent. Well, gang. So, and thank you, Cindy, for that introduction. Yeah, I've been around for a while, as perhaps you can tell. But actually, I started out my career in Silicon Valley long ago and far away as a grad student here at Stanford. While I was at Stanford, I wound up somewhat accidentally starting up a software company, and that got me hooked into this whole innovation ecosystem here in venture capital in Silicon Valley. I actually wound up starting or restarting or co-founding 4 different companies here in Silicon Valley, and 2 of them we took public, but 2 of them crashed and burned. And the great thing about Silicon Valley is that when you crash and burn, you just pick yourself up and you dust yourself off, and then you spin the story a little bit, and then you go do it again. So that is one of the great aspects of the Silicon Valley ethos, is the ability to recover from failure, to fail and then get a chance to do it again. So we'll talk a little bit about that during the course of this conversation. But I have been on the corporate investor side, on both sides of the equation, as it turns out. So a couple of my companies, when I was an entrepreneur, were funded by corporates. So one of my companies was funded by Microsoft and by Intel. And I'll tell you, they are tough investors. They are tough investors. So it was just very interesting experiencing the corporate venture side at the same time. In that same company, we also had some well-known Sand Hill Road investors, Kleiner Perkins and Excel partners were also investors alongside the corporate investors. So it was a very interesting dynamic, the interaction between corporate investors, financial investors, and us poor entrepreneurs. So, but wound up taking that company public, and then got into the venture capital side of things. So I've spent most of the last 20 years actually on the venture capital side, and have had the opportunity to invest as a VC, both as a sort of standard Sand Hill Road financial investor, but also as a corporate investor, working for my corporate limited partners to find technologies of strategic relevance to them, and investing in them, and then doing business development to connect them. So I've had a pretty broad experience in that has covered both traditional venture capital as well as corporate venture capital in various flavors, as well as an entrepreneurial background and DNA. So I hear, most of you are from corporate environments, but I'm hoping that all of you still consider yourselves at some level to be entrepreneurs, because part of the whole future of innovation is for all of us to take on an entrepreneurial mindset as we look to create innovation for our companies and for our ecosystems. So what I wanted to do today, the RISE group and Cindy very generously gave me this opportunity to spend some time talking about what I have learned over the years about how the process of innovation has changed, and largely characterized, not necessarily purely driven by Silicon Valley, but from this perspective of Silicon Valley, we've had the opportunity to see that the nature of innovation, the process of innovation, the nature of corporate investing, and the keys to success in corporate investing have evolved over the years. And so what I want to do is perhaps maybe shake you up a little bit, but at least offer some perspectives on how that change has come about over the years and what it means for all of us, corporate investors, venture investors, and entrepreneurs. So with that, what I'm going to do is share with you the top 10 lessons from Silicon Valley. So jumping in, lesson number 1. So interestingly, what I've learned from my experience here in Silicon Valley is that the key to innovation is not about invention. So traditionally, both in academia and in public policy level, and even at the corporate policy level, the focus has been on invention. The focus has been on inventing new things. Can we come up with some breakthrough technology that we can patent and we can own and we can build our business on? So that's generally been the mindset about innovation, more or less forever. But it turns out that, in fact, it's not about invention. The reality is that it's about innovation. Of course, that then raises the question, what's the difference between invention and innovation? Well, let's look at some of the game-changing inventions in the world over the last 75 years, since World War II. If you think about all of the amazing new technologies that we as a global society have invented over this 75 years, it's been amazing, and it's ranged, all across the map, obviously, from jet engines and atomic energy to obviously computers and cell phones and everything in between, including ag tech and egg tech, ed tech and space tech. So look at all these inventions. And when I take a look at sort of the amazing invention that we've gone through over the last 75 years, all these things that we've come up with, and I also think back on sort of the history of Silicon Valley, one of the things that I realized is that in spite of Silicon Valley being considered sort of the center of the world of technology over this period, very few of these technologies were invented in Silicon Valley. And in fact, if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, what you discover is very few fundamental technologies were actually invented in Silicon Valley. So you look at all these things, and here's perhaps a quiz. What technology on this list was actually invented in Silicon Valley? So the only thing that on this list that was invented in Silicon Valley was the microprocessor. So Intel gets half credit, partial credit. Intel gets credit for inventing the microprocessor. But all of these other technologies were invented elsewhere in the world. And so when you think about the success of Silicon Valley, you think to yourself, wait a second, if they didn't invent a lot of new technologies, why is Silicon Valley so successful? Well, it turns out, it goes to my fundamental point. It's not about inventing new technology. It's really about figuring out the difference between innovation and invention. So I'm not going to ask each of you to tell me your definition of innovation, but think about it. What is the difference between innovation and invention? Well, what innovation really is about the novel commercialization, which is, a way of saying pulling together in a commercial product a bunch of ideas that other people have come up with mainly. Mainly it's other people's ideas, other people's technologies. So think about the most successful companies in Silicon Valley. Apple, Apple Computer, you know, from day to day or whatever, the most valuable company on the planet, right? Apple Computer. What did Apple Computer invent? Think about it. What did they invent? Apple Computer. Apple did not invent the microcomputer. They did not invent WYSIWYG software. They didn't invent the mouse. They did not invent the MP3 player. Apple did not invent the smartphone. Apple did not invent the tablet computer. Apple did not invent the smartwatch. What did Apple invent? The key to Apple's success has not been inventing new products or new technologies. The key to Apple's success has been scanning the globe intensely, looking at these emerging technologies that they can grab. So they grabbed WYSIWYG software from Xerox PARC, and they grabbed the mouse from SRI, and they borrowed technologies from a variety of people, put them together in a novel way, and have been phenomenally successful, right? At commercializing new products using other people's technology. Now, of course, yes, Apple has a bazillion patents, and they patent all the sort of incremental improvements, but the key is they have not depended upon inventing fundamental technology in order to make progress. They put things together that other people have invented. You know, a company that gets credit or gets considered to be one of the most innovative companies on the planet is Google. Everybody says Google is, you know, amazingly innovative. Google lets, you know, its engineers spend all this time developing new innovations. But you think about Google, what has Google invented? Right? I mean, so obviously Google did not invent search. Google came along relatively late, but they, you know, have this patent they call page ranking, named sort of as a double entendre for Larry Page and web page. So Google came up with this innovation they call page ranking, which is straight out of university, right? So in the university world, in the academic world, how do you judge the quality or importance of an academic paper? You don't judge the importance of an academic paper based upon the number of times it's been read. You base the importance of an academic paper on the number of times it is cited by others. And so Larry and Sergey said, why are we ranking web pages based upon their popularity in terms of reading? Why don't we rank web pages in terms of their popularity in terms of citation, which is to say links? And that was their innovation. And stunningly, and everybody here in sort of the IP world is blown away by the fact that they actually got a patent for that. Because, you know, what's weird is that it is obvious. Every academic in the world knows exactly that point, and they just applied it to web pages rather than to academic papers. So then what else has Google invented? So how does Google make almost all of its money? Answer. Everybody knows how Google makes all of its money, right? Google makes almost all of its money from advertising. And the core to Google's money machine is an advertising method called pay-per-click. And again, the innovation here was, why don't we charge advertisers not based on the number of impressions or views? Why don't we charge advertisers based on the number of times people click through on a link? That, you know, clever, makes sense, but it turns out Google did not invent that. In fact, Google stole it from another company in Southern California, and the other company wound up suing Google. It went to court, spent years in court. By the time the other company actually got a judgment against Google, that other company had more or less failed. Yahoo had bought them, but they continued the suit. They wound up getting an incredible settlement. They got $100 million from Google for violating the patent and stealing that idea. I should be a little cautious. I don't think I'm libeling them when I say that. I think everybody agrees that that was they broke the law. They got a judgment against them. Plus they got some equity. But by the time the courts said, Google, you stole that idea. By the time the courts made the judgment, $100 million was chump change for Google. So, okay, so now, by the way, I should be crystal clear here. I am not recommending to any of you that you go steal IP from other people. Be sure. I just want to make sure that's not the message here. The message here is use appropriate legal approaches to casting your net globally around university researchers, small companies, startup companies, entrepreneurs, innovators, looking for new technologies that you can leverage into a new commercial product that can make a dent in your corporate revenue. So lesson number one is it's not about inventing new things. It's about paying attention to what's out there and then developing new products internally from all of the brilliance of the rest of the world. So that leads to lesson number two. Lesson number two has to do with corporate R&D. So the traditional model of corporate R&D was protected internal R&D. So, very interesting sort of history of technology. In the early 20th century, actually the late 19th century, early 20th century, as corporations became the places where technology was developed and deployed, you had the rise of corporate research labs and the rise of corporate R&D. And big companies like, AT&T, Bell, and Westinghouse, and then eventually RCA and IBM would hire, boatloads of PhDs, and they would stick them on these campuses and put barbed wire fences around them and have them come up with, brand new inventions and innovations, and keep it all very secret and keep it all very internal. But, fast forward roughly a century, a guy named John Chambers at Cisco, he may not be the only one who developed this, but he was the one who really turned this into a standard business practice. One day, John Chambers got up in front of the team at Cisco, and he said, we've got a whole bunch of really, really smart people here at Cisco. You guys are, among the smartest people on the planet, but I gotta say, we don't have all of the smart people on the planet inside Cisco. So tell you what, we're gonna stop spending so much money on internal R&D, and we're gonna put a pot of money into our strategic investment group, and we're gonna start supporting startup companies. We're gonna go try to sponsor the best and the brightest from around the world that are coming up with new technologies. And so John Chambers popularized this in Silicon Valley. Intel was doing something similar, but they developed this new way, which is called global open innovation. And several years later, a guy named Hank Chesbrough at Berkeley popularized the term open innovation to explain in academic terms what John Chambers and some of the other entrepreneurs had figured out, which is if you focus your innovation efforts internally in a closed internal R&D approach, you're going to be limiting your opportunity for innovation in your organization. So instead, you should open up your organization to this idea of finding and funding the best entrepreneurs with emerging technologies that have strategic interest for your particular company. And so now this idea of open innovation has caught on like wildfire and is spreading around the world. It is interesting, though, my observation as I talk to corporates around the world, pretty much every corporate is at a minimum giving lip service to the idea of open innovation, and pretty much every corporate around the world has created something like an innovation center or an innovation lab or a corporate innovation group or even a corporate venture capital group to focus on it. But there is still, in most corporations, there is still this tale of two cities within the corporation. There's the team that has been given this charter, this mandate to pursue open innovation and to go explore. And then there's the team inside the company who, on a pretty consistent basis, says, hey, we don't need those guys. We can do it ourselves. We've been around, we've seen everything. We know about those new technologies. Yeah, never gonna fly. So you've got this tension in a lot of corporations around alignment between the corporate innovation group, which is chartered to go pursue this open innovation agenda, and this internal mindset, which we sometimes refer to as not invented here, this NIH, not invented here mindset that says, if it's coming from, some academic at Caltech or some entrepreneur in Munich, they don't know as much as we know about our business. They can't possibly have a technology that's better than what we could do. And so you wind up having this tension inside the organizations. And that's why frequently these open innovation efforts, they are not as successful as they could be, because there hasn't been sufficient alignment across the entire corporate fabric to connect up the business units and the frontline troops on the product development and marketing side with this corporate innovation effort. And so frequently there's as many battles sort of internally as there are, sort of between the corporation and the rest of the competition, which is too bad. So, the most successful open innovation companies figure out this alignment, figure out, how to get how to reduce the friction across the organization for the adoption of new technologies, new products that, initially are going to be really small contributors to the corporation, but could provide the seed for the next billion-dollar line of business. So that's lesson number 2. It's time to make sure that your corporate R&D takes advantage of open innovation, and that, beyond simply giving it lip service, you actually wind up implementing a program to activate it and align everybody in the organization. So was there a question? Did I hear a question, or was that just a cough? Okay.
This is Dia.
Hi, Dia.
I have a question. I'm curious because this kind of tension that does happen in corporates. I work for L'Oreal Open Innovation, and so it's a big corporate with a big R&D internally. Do you have some examples of corporates that are successful in this, and how do they do this to get a good alignment internally between these two segments?
Yeah, well, probably, sort of the best example is Cisco. Intel has done a pretty good job as well, but just to, to cover off the Cisco model, what John Chambers set up and what they did was they said, look, I expect that 2/3 of our revenue in the next 3 years is going to come from new products. And there's no way you guys are going to be able to develop new products, new lines of business internally. And so, Ms. Business Unit Manager, if you want to be successful, then you're going to have to figure out how to get out there and bring these new technologies into your organization so that over the next 3 years, you're going to triple your revenue. And 2/3 of that new revenue is going to be, new products based on new technologies that you go find. And so by getting the business units away from the next quarter focus and saying, I can't be bothered with those corporate innovation people and their cute, clever, amazing new technologies, because I got a quarterly problem I've got to solve. You've got to get, from throughout the organization, from the top down, depending on how you're you've got to get that corporate commitment that says, this is the way that we're going to grow, and get the business unit people incentivized around that kind of growth by acquiring new technologies and developing new products based upon these new technologies. So that's the core is what we see is if there ain't alignment within the organization with the business unit people and the innovation people, if you don't have that alignment, it's not going to happen. The way to get the alignment is to get them to sign up and be incentivized. They're going to be evaluated based on this. They're not just right. It's not just a nice to have.
So
you think that'll work?
Well, okay, I'm Sarah, and actually Dia and I were colleagues, so we work together and we're very familiar with the problem. So I understand what you mean by saying get the business units on board so that they have kind of no choice but to look externally. However, so we're coming from the R&D department, and usually these, if we look externally for solutions, they tend to take a bit longer to develop because or to modify their technologies such that they can be relevant to us. And if we work with the business units, their time scale is usually very different from R&D time scales. So I mean, then there's a mismatch, right?
Yep. And that's the idea behind quote unquote skunk works. So the other sort of variation on it is don't bother the business unit now, because the time frame for getting something to market and to scale at a level that will be relevant to any business unit person is just too long. And so no matter what you tell them, if they think that maybe in 2 years there's going to be a $20 million contribution to their $1 billion line of business, they're going to say, to heck with that, right? And so the other model is sometimes called a skunk works. I'm not sure if that phrase has percolated around the world, but it was sort of invented during World War II by Lockheed as a way to develop a brand new product, totally separated from all of the politics of the current organization. And so what they did, and this is what Steve Jobs did with the Macintosh. So what they said is, we're going to just create an entire new line of business in an entirely different building. And we're not going to let the old mindset infect this, innovation mindset. Now that's obviously controversial, but that's how Lockheed did it in developing a new jet airplane, and that's how Apple did it in developing the Macintosh. So that's the other way to get out from under the business unit, quarterly time pressure, and the business unit, sort of scale metrics. So that's another model. So I mean, and there, variations as well. And I'd be happy to have this conversation. To continue this conversation, we can talk more if you want. Okay.
Thank you.
So okay. So lesson number three has to do with corporate culture. And this is a challenge we see around the world. There is generally, in most corporations, there is some variation on a culture that says cultivate consensus. And what that sometimes means is, everybody else shut up and do what I tell you to do. So sometimes that's what it means. And sometimes it actually means we're not going to do anything until everybody agrees. Either way, you have a suboptimal culture. If you're in an organization that matches sort of the first model, which shut up and do what I tell you to do. You know, nobody really loves.
All right, I think we kind of lost connection with Bill.
Can you hear me
Let's
now?
get- Oh yes, you're back. Thank you for coming back. Okay.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Thank you for coming back. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave. But yeah,
Oh,
I did.
no, oh, sorry, that's a joking. I mean, sorry. Okay. We're glad to see you again.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened, but somehow we got cut off. All right.
Yeah.
So I will go back to see if I can find my screen here. And okay, so when did you lose me? Did you this discussion about cultivating consensus? Cindy, did you hear this discussion about?
Yeah, cultivate consensus.
Okay, so I was talking about the two types.
Yeah.
Okay, when did you lose me? Did you lose me in the middle of that, or did we get the main point? The main point was
at the beginning. The last words I heard was not doing anything until like everyone agree to do so,
right,
or something like that. Yeah.
Right, and so my main point is that sort of a traditional corporate culture drives high achievers nuts, right? Because either their contribution isn't respected if it's a top-down culture, or you know, nothing gets done because everybody's waiting around for consensus, and so that drives people nuts too. So the point I was trying to make is, in order to be successful in scaling an organization, in innovating, is, believe it or not, you have to cultivate divergent thinking in your organization. Now that seems like a contradiction, perhaps, to some, but let me explain this in the form of a parable. Okay, it's the parable of the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer. So some of you have heard this sort of before, right? So the optimist, right? The optimist is the person, oh, look what I got here. The optimist is the person who says, hey, this glass is half full. And the pessimist is the person who looks at the same glass and says, that glass is half empty. And the engineer is the person who looks at the same glass and says, this glass was engineered to be twice as big as it needs to be. So the point of the story, right, is that you have three different perspectives, the same set of facts, but three different ways. Can you hear me? Yes? Are we okay? I heard somebody talking.
Yes.
It was me. Sorry, I forgot to mute. Yeah. Try to fix the connection problem. So sorry. Yeah.
No problem. All right, good. But you got the parable, right? So the point of the story is same set of facts, three different perspectives. And the way this applies to corporate innovation is, if everybody thinks the same way, then you're going to have limited outcomes in terms of new thinking, creative thinking. But if you create a team with all these different perspectives, then you're going to get a much richer innovation environment. Now, the challenge is how do you manage all of these different voices? And this is a huge problem for every team, which is to say, if you have a bunch of highly ambitious people who are really smart, but they have these different perspectives, what's going to happen in any given meeting? What's going to happen? You got a bunch of smart people with different perspectives. You're trying to solve a problem. What's the room going to be like? Anybody? What's going to happen is people are going to start to argue. They're going to start, in fact, they might even start yelling at each other, but they're going to disagree. You're going to have people disagreeing with each other, you know, whenever you're trying to get things done. So that doesn't sound good, right? That sounds like that could be a dysfunctional kind of team. But believe it or not, the most high-performing teams have a lot of internal conflict. So this was this huge epiphany for me when I made the transition from being an entrepreneur to being an investor. So as an entrepreneur, I thought the whole idea of entrepreneurship was you have a vision and you go find a bunch of people who share your vision and you arms together and you march forward in harmony to achieve this vision. And so when I would discover that we were arguing at the conference, in the conference room, we were yelling at each other in the conference room, I thought, oh my God, what went wrong? Something must be going wrong because we all should be working in harmony toward the achievement of this vision. But then when I became a VC and I started looking at, okay, I got to understand, what does it take to build a high-performing team? And when I looked around at high-performing teams, I was stunned to discover that conflict is more the rule than it is the exception in high-performing teams. Organizations where there appears to be harmony, where there appears to be consensus, those organizations tend to fall behind. Those organizations tend not to be very innovative. The trick, though, is in a high-performing organization, you've got to give everybody voice, but then you've got to say to people, look, we've listened to everyone. We've processed all of these inputs, and our judgment is that going in this direction is the best way to go. Now, you may have disagreed with that point of view, but I'll tell you what. If you don't get on board and you don't commit, then you're out of here. So it's okay to disagree, but after we disagree, you gotta commit. Because if you sabotage this decision, then you are out of here. As some people like to say, you are off the bus or you are off the island, right? So it's okay to have disagreement. It's okay to have conflict as long as it's constructive conflict. That's something that's really, really hard for big organizations. Most big organizations are so afraid of conflict that they crush it. And they crush it either by trying to do this consensus or by just being top down and saying, shut up, don't argue, just do what I say. So if you want to create an innovative organization, if you want to get the innovation mindset across the corporation, you've got to give everybody a voice, but you've got to get them to sign up to this deal that says, we'll give you a voice, but once we make a decision, you have to commit. If you don't commit, then you're off the island. Lesson number 4 has to do with leadership. So leadership, leadership is the most talked about topic in management and despite all of the talk on leadership, there is unbelievably little light ever shed on the topic of leadership. It's astonishing to me how many books are written on leadership and how little value they actually have. But I'm not, so am I going to write a book? Maybe. But in any case, the traditional idea of leadership is that there are leaders and there are followers. In fact, Peter Drucker, famous, business academic, Peter Drucker's definition of leader is a leader is someone who has followers. So that's kind of clever. His main point there was you cannot establish leadership by dictate, that if you are appointed leader and people don't listen to you, then you're not technically a leader. So only if people listen to you are you truly a leader. Well, okay, that's somewhat useful in a corporate environment, but it's not useful in a dynamic world where things are changing rapidly and you've got to be continuously innovating. So the new way, the new approach to leadership, the new idea of leadership is that leaders hire leaders. The only way to scale a company is if the people you hire are also leaders. You cannot hire followers. If you hire followers, what happens? You create this deadwood organization of people who are waiting for you to tell them what to do. You cannot scale a business with that structure. The only way to scale a business is to push leadership to the edge, push leadership to the point of contact between the company and customers, between the company and vendors, between the company and partners. If all decisions have to bubble up into the sort of central CEO office suite, then you're never going to be able to move dynamically. You're going to bottleneck the organization. So leaders hire leaders. So what does that mean? What's the definition of a leader? So if I had you all in the room today together, we would have this discussion. You know, what's the definition of a good leader? So, okay, let's try it. Okay, guys, tell me, what do you think? Somebody pipe up. What do you think a good leader is? What's your definition of a good leader? Do you have a corporate definition? Do you have your own definition? What's a good leader?
Someone who can bring out the best in the group.
Okay, good. Someone who can bring out the best in the group. Anybody else?
Someone who can identify strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Okay, strengths and weaknesses. Okay, good.
I think I would add the leader should set a vision and then inspire everyone to work towards solving it.
Good, good. Set the vision, inspire the team. Okay.
Someone who's be the good listener and also having empathy.
Okay, great. Listener, empathy. Great. You guys are great. You guys are great. You know, 5 or 6 different ideas, right? But they're all right. They're all right. You know, a good leader does all these things, right? You know, so a good leader, and this is just a short list, right? You know, anybody who wants to sit down and spend time, like we just started to do, and put on the whiteboard all the characteristics that they consider to be key for a good leader, you're going to come up with, you know, 20, 25, 30 things, right? And, you know, people write books and say, these are the 6 things, or these are the 4 things, or this is the whatever, right? People write books and they get paid for making it, trying to make it easier on you. The point is, it's not easy. The other point is that there are all sorts of characteristics you want in a good leader. And you look at this list and you say, why would I hire anybody who doesn't match this list? Why would I hire a follower? That's crazy. I can't afford to hire a follower. I've got to hire someone like this, who has these characteristics, who can be a leader in their particular domain, who knows, like every good leader, when they have the information they need and the authority and the accountability and the responsibility to make a decision and get it done now, versus when I take it back to the rest of the team and say, hey, let's talk about this. That's true of every good leader, whether they're on the edge or in the C-suite. So you want to hire people who are leaders. You do not want to hire followers. Lesson number 5 has to do with competitive strategy. So the traditional concept of competition that, you know, most of us were raised with in whatever business training we had was, it's about crushing the competition, right? We win, you lose, right? That's sort of, it's certainly the American idea. It's certainly the American capitalistic traditional model of competition. You know, we win, we crush you, you lose. That's the traditional model. What we've discovered is that that's a limiting model. That's a very limiting model. And there are other ways to win. And the other way to win is a win-win. We win, you win. Now, what does that mean? That sounds like sort of feel-good, fancy philosophy, but there actually are business models that make sense, that are win-win business models that create huge leverage for your organization. And that's the, you know, broadly referred to as the ecosystem model of collaboration. So you can have a win-win, you know, in your industry, even with your competitors, if, for example, you get together and you agree on standards. So frequently, particularly in technology, a limitation on the technology, a limitation to the adoption of the technology is there's no consistency in the infrastructure standards for the adoption of the technology. If we all agree on the sort of infrastructure standards, then the whole industry can explode. The whole industry can grow, will compete, you know, sort of within that context, but the industry can grow much more rapidly if we enable it, if we enable customers to easily adopt whatever technology is out there. So getting together and collaborating around standards is one form of collaboration. Another is to collaborate around marketing. And this was, you know, my wonderful experience with one of my companies long ago and far away. One of my companies is a company called The Learning Company, educational software company, early days of the PC and home computers. And so it wasn't quite clear how to figure out what educational software to buy for our kids. And so we got 5 companies together, including IBM, and we put together a collaborative marketing plan where we went around the country and we went on, you know, national trade shows and advertising, and we promoted educational software, and we promoted solutions that, you know, included all of us. And we dramatically accelerated the growth of the market by collaborating together around marketing the value of educational technology software versus, at the time, it was Nintendo, right? So parents had a choice between Nintendo or educational software, and we said, hey, go ahead, buy Nintendo, but also buy educational software. Or, you know, another form of ecosystem is the platform model. So this is, you know, gotten a lot of visibility recently with examples. You know, the best example is the iTunes originally, and now the Apple Store and the Android Store, and now Amazon, right? All of those companies, originally they started with their own solutions, but, you know, once they had a sufficient platform, what they said is, okay, you other retailers, you other product marketing companies, you other product companies, go ahead and offer your solutions on our platform. So obviously Apple won, Amazon won, Google wins by having all of these developers develop on their platform and market to the world on their platforms. So there are ways to collaborate to accelerate your success. And so if we can get away from this traditional mindset that says, I don't dare collaborate with my competition because I want to crush them, then you might be able to develop new models of collaboration where everybody wins. Lesson number 6 has to do with the attitude toward failure. And in traditional corporate environments, failure is not an option. The traditional corporate model is, right, this pyramid. We hire a bunch of young people in at the bottom, right? And then, you know, we see if they make any mistakes. If they don't make any mistakes, then we promote them. And then we look at those, if they don't make any mistakes, then we promote them. And so what you do is you create this culture that says, look, as long as you do what we tell you to do and you don't make any mistakes, you're going to get promoted. If you go off the reservation, if you go, you know, if you go experimenting with things and you try things and they don't work, then you're out of here. You're costing us money. We're not going to keep you around. That leads to the creation, the calcification of an organization, right? So what happens is you wind up with a management structure where everybody is terrified of making a mistake because the way they got there was to make sure they followed the rules and they didn't make a mistake. So that kills innovation in an organization. You've got to figure out a way to enable failure. You've got to figure out a way to allow for experimentation and give people the chance to try things, because failure is one of the best ways to learn. So as you probably know, I mean, there's a bunch of wisdom around this that we all know from our personal life, but has been taken away from the corporate world. One comes from the world of athletics. You know, if you take a shot, you may miss, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So this is attributed to some coach or some player, and it's a little, it's not sure who first said this, but this is absolutely true. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you cannot create a culture where you can take a lot of shots, you don't want to take big, hugely expensive shots. You want to take a lot of efficient, inexpensive, high value in terms of information shots to go see, is this going to work? Is this something that makes sense? Are customers interested in this? What do customers want? You got to take a lot of shots in order to learn the most amount. And so one of my favorite experiences, and as I was saying, sometimes failure is the best way to learn. One of my favorite sort of examples of this, we happen to be, as you heard, we're investors in SpaceX, right? And so in January of this year, SpaceX launched a rocket, and oh my God, look what happened. It blew up. And you think, oh, terrible, terrible. But the reality is they intentionally blew this up to see what would happen. They spent, tens of millions of dollars blowing up this rocket to see what would happen when they blew it up. And so, that's just sort of the ultimate example of how you can learn from failure. Obviously, you want to experiment in such a way that if it fails, it is not a disaster. You want it to be a controlled experiment so you can get all the information without, unnecessary pain. But certainly, in order to be effective and innovative in trying new things, you've got to be willing to let people try and fail. Lesson number 7 has to do with sort of the mindset of our constrained resources. So again, you're all trained at university that traditionally the way the world works is we have increasing scarcity of the factors of input, right? So capital, labor, energy, raw materials, all of those things become increasingly scarce, as they are used up. And that's sort of the traditional physical world attitude toward the way in which you design your corporate growth plans. But that's not the world anymore. The world is now digital. It's no longer just physical. And so the new way of thinking about what constraints we have is to assume increasing abundance, not increasing scarcity. Because in the digital world, bandwidth is always becoming more available. Storage, compute power, people on the network, access to nodes and links, the size of the network is increasingly abundant. That's a very different way of thinking about innovation. In that mindset, you think about not kind of the world becoming resources becoming increasingly scarce. You think about, well, let's design for a world where they're going to be increasingly abundant. And so in that world, if you have a mindset of scarcity, what you're going to do is you're going to design a cheaper Nokia phone, right? And makes sense. So we've already built the expensive phones and sold it to the rich people. Now, if we want to in the market, what we got to do is we got to build a cheaper phone for the poor people. And that's what Nokia did. But if you have a mindset of abundance, you design an insanely expensive iPhone. Because today, maybe only a few people are going to be willing to pay for it. But those people are going to discover this is like an order of magnitude more exciting than that Nokia thing that we bought before. And so in a year from now, it's going to be even more capable because there are going to be more apps, there's going to be more bandwidth, there are going to be more cell towers. And so if you design for abundance, you're more likely to meet the market where the market is going. Lesson number 8 has to do with the role of ecosystem stakeholders in each of your ecosystems or regions. So traditionally, in most parts of the world, the government drives the ecosystem. And so in the innovation ecosystem, the entrepreneurial venture capital ecosystem in most countries in the world is driven, God bless these government initiatives, appreciate them, sponsoring accelerators, sponsoring funds, sponsoring education. Most parts of the world, that's the way the innovation ecosystem is driven. But if the government does it, then it's never going to take off. So what you've got to do is you've got to get industry driving the ecosystem. Now there's a sort of false image of Silicon Valley, that Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley because of Stanford University and because of the venture capital industry. No, That's not why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. The reason Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley is because, well, fundamentally, what happened was this guy named William Shockley, who invented the transistor at Bell Labs in New Jersey, he was sort of a controversial character. He got into fights with his friends at Bell Labs and decided, okay, let me go back to California. So he headed to Caltech, where he came from. He was from Caltech. And he said, you know, this transistor thing we've invented, you can do some cool things with these transistors. Maybe I should start a company to commercialize this transistor thing that I've invented. And so he was going to set up a company in Los Angeles to commercialize the application of transistors to new products. And a friend of his said, wait a second, one thing led to another. And he decides, okay, I'm going to start it in Northern California, in Mountain View, Palo Alto, rather than in Los Angeles. His friend that ran a company that developed electronic instruments. And he said, look, I'll fund you and start up this company. I'll give you the initial funding. And that's how Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley. It could end up being, you know, Silicon Basin down in Los Angeles. But William Shockley came up here. He hired Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore and a bunch of other, you know, famous people in the semiconductor industry. He alienated them. And so Bob Noyce said, I'm not going to work for this jerk anymore. And I want to start my own company. And he looked around and he said, how do I start a company? And the guy who ran Fairchild Camera out of New York, the guy who ran Fairchild Camera said, hey, you know, this integrated circuit stuff, it could be interesting stuff. I'll tell you what, I'll fund you. And so Fairchild funded Bob Noyce and the team that split off from Shockley Labs to commercialize the integrated circuit. And then they got together and they said, hey, I wonder if we can put a central processor together on this silicon. And so they started Intel, and the rest is history. But that's the reason Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, not because of Stanford, not because of venture capital, but because of corporate investment. It was corporate investment that made Silicon Valley what it is today. Now, obviously Stanford helped, the government helped, venture capital grew up and venture capital has helped. But if you really want to get your innovation ecosystem going, get your corporations actively involved in supporting the innovation ecosystem. And it's totally consistent with this idea we talked about before of open innovation. So if you can get collaboration from all the corporates in your ecosystem, get them all together and get them supporting the entrepreneurs and the innovators, then it's going to be a win-win for everyone, for the entrepreneurs, for your corporations, for your community, for your country, for your ecosystem. So how are we doing on time? Running tight, almost done. Lesson 9. See, you know, the great thing about a top 10 list is you know how close I am to the end, right? So lesson 9. Lesson 9 has to do with the globalization of innovation. So, you know, when I first came to Silicon Valley, when we started up a company, pretty much all we really cared about was Silicon Valley, you know, and potential customers sort of within our reach. And then because most all of the customers were technology companies and they were all in Silicon Valley, and so everybody was down the street. And then as it turned out, you know, that diffused across the US and, you know, Austin and Seattle and Los Angeles and Boston and New York. So it became a, you know, a US ecosystem. And then it went global. So what happened was, you know, at the end of the last century, sort of the frame of reference was that Silicon Valley innovated and then the world copied it. And that was okay, that was great, whatever. But the world has now changed and this whole innovation ecosystem has gone global. And now what's happening is everybody innovates and everybody copies. And so again, it's back to my first point that, you know, it used to be that there was this sort of pecking order You know, Silicon Valley, they were the innovators and everybody else was a copycat. And somehow copycats were not real entrepreneurs, right? But the reality is, as I said, it's not about coming up with a new invention. It's about figuring out how can I use this new technology and incorporate it in this new product to offer value, compelling value to my customers. And so it doesn't matter if you borrow ideas from down the street or across the world. You should be paying attention to innovation everywhere, and you should be taking advantage of innovation wherever it pops up on the earth. And then finally, guys, lesson number 10 has to do with the role of technology in innovation. So when I came to Silicon Valley, you know, the whole frame of reference was that technology drives innovation, right? That was the cool thing. All of these amazing new technologies that had bubbled up, you know, microprocessors and networking and the internet and Wi-Fi and wireless and cell phones and digital. All these cool technologies that were driving innovation, right? So clearly that is what drives innovation. You should be focused on developing and gathering together technology and technological expertise, right? That's the whole thing. Not exactly. What we have now learned is that in fact, people drive innovation. Now, right, that sounds like, well, duh, Bill, right? But there is an important nuance here that is key to the way you think about the innovation process. So sort of traditionally in Silicon Valley, and you know, my own experience, we would come up with these really cool gadgets or this really cool software, this really amazing technology, and we would go talk to other technologists. We'd go talk to other engineers, and we would go talk to them and say, isn't this a really cool technology? And other engineers, they're engineers, right? So they'd say, yeah, that's a cool technology. And so that, you know, there was this sort of closed network of gadget freaks that were able to expand Silicon Valley. But once innovation moved beyond information technology and the gadget freaks, once innovation started penetrating every part of our world, right? You think about the world now, there's like no aspect of our lives, of our business, of our workplace, of our cities, of our governments, of our leisure time, of our homes, of our families, that is not infected with, you know, innovation and new technology. And so you cannot assume that engineering elegance is going to enable you to win. You've got to appreciate that the only way you're going to win is if you win over the hearts and minds of people. People are what drive innovation. That should be obvious, but it's still not entirely obvious to, how do I put this the right way? Well, you know, to the people with an engineering mindset, I should say, okay, as opposed to an innovation mindset. So what you want to make sure of is that any aspect of your innovation takes into account the fact that the only way this innovation is going to be built and developed and marketed and sold and used and upsold, the only way that happens is if you win over the hearts and minds of people. And so that has given rise to what we now call design thinking. We used to call it human-machine interface, you know, because engineers define that term. But now people realize we've got to be people-centric. And so now we call it design thinking. And the idea is, yes, innovation frequently involves taking technology and creating new products, but those new products only deliver value if people can use them and benefit from them. And so one of the most important lessons of my entrepreneurial career and my venture capital career is I learned very early on, it turns out people don't buy products. What if they don't buy products, what do they buy? People don't buy products, people buy benefits. And too many innovators, too many product marketing people or product managers, they're focused on the product. They're focused on, you know, the shape, the look, the feel, the technology, the whatever, manufacturing the product. But You don't buy a product, you buy a benefit. You buy what that product enables that you couldn't do before. And if you don't maintain that perspective, you're going to get wrapped up in sort of the product side of things rather than focusing on the people side of things. And so this applies in everything you do as a corporation. I'm not just talking about customers, right? I'm talking about the people inside the organization. How do you innovate if you don't focus on people? You can't just create an innovation process that ignores the people component. Obviously, it's people driven. How do you build a business without paying attention to your vendors, to your partners, as well as to your channel and channels of distribution, as well as your customers? So sort of end to end, being people-centric, which is to say customer-centric, internally people-centric, stakeholder-centric as a corporation, is what's going to define your success or failure. So people drive innovation. That's lesson number 10. And with that, a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson: if you really want to be successful, you've got to tap the power of enthusiasm. Quote, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. If you build a corporate culture that crushes enthusiasm, if you create relationships with your customers that alienate you from your customers, you're never going to create something great. So tap the power of enthusiasm, focus on people. With that, the new innovation paradigm, top 10 lessons: focus on innovation, not invention, invest in open innovation, embrace diverse teams, tap creative conflict, build a team of leaders, not a team of followers, win through collaboration, don't punish failure, encourage experimentation, design for increasing abundance in this digital world, engage industry, get government out of the way. It's okay to copy, and remember, people drive success, not technology. So with that, I'm hoping we have some time for questions. Cindy, how are we doing? Are we okay?
We are running out of time, so some people might want to go to another room for a new workshop. But I'll be with here until like the last question has been answered. So feel free to make a discussion, please.
I did not have a chance to look at the chat. Okay, here's the chat to see if there are questions. Okay, let's see. Bill, thanks a lot for the amazing session. Sorry, we'll need to jump. Okay. All right. Is anybody still out there who has a question? Hello?
I would ask question from my side. Yesterday we had had a networking here at Reichert headquarters in Bangkok, and I meet some of the startup that they have start out from corporate ventures. I mean, they were employees, and then they were like entering the program, and they started a business, a startup on their own, and then one day, boom, they become a startup and entrepreneur, and they struggle in the way that the company just get them on funding, but they don't know how like to really move forward, and they come to talk to me on is there so as a startup they don't know how to go next because they have the technologies, they are the team of engineers from oil and gas.
Okay.
Yes.
Did they know who
they
go ahead.
Yeah, but yeah, they start at what next, how to scale, who are the really market. They can sell only the kind of affiliates in the corporates in the same industry. Yeah. So
well,
any case example.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tension in every startup. Is every startup has, well, most startups have a whole bunch of different directions in which they could go, and it could be new products, it could be new markets, it could be different customers, it could be different channels, it could be different geographies. There's all sorts of choices you need to make as an entrepreneur about how to scale and what's the right next step and what's the pathway to scale. And so the generally the solution is to, define your options. And if you can eliminate any options quickly, then, eliminate them quickly. That won't eliminate all your options, but then you've got a defined set of options, right? We're either going to take this product and then build more products for the oil and gas industry, or we're going to take this product and make it work for manufacturing, make it work for industry, make it work for process, whatever. Just as an example, I don't know. But right, so that represents a set of choices. And so again, back to being customer centric. So go find the people who are likely to be the customers of all in each of those different scenarios. So if you're going to build new products for the same industry, who are the customers? If you're going to adopt or adapt the product for different industries, who are those customers? And you go talk to those customers. And it's a challenge. It's an interesting challenge for engineers. I mean, I've been through this so many times. Engineers, God bless engineers. Without engineers, we would still be living in caves, right? I mean, that's, without the engineering mindset, we would still be living in caves. So God bless engineers, but engineers frequently are challenged when it comes to going out and being willing to talk to customers who may not be engineers. They don't have the language, they don't have the comfort, they don't have the bonding. So it's really important when you start up a company that you have these diverse skill sets, right? So I spoke of having sort of different perspectives, and that comes with, the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer. The optimist is frequently the extrovert who is excited to go out and talk to customers and find out, will they be excited about this? The engineer wants to perfect the product, right? The engineer doesn't want to go talk to people. They want to perfect the product. So you need that diversity of mindset and skill set to go do the work to make the decision, what do we do next? I mean, so share that with your friend, and hopefully, it would, that'll give them some direction.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I would like to ask a question if we have a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure. But excuse me, would you mind if I share the screen of the QR code of the survey here while you answer the question?
Okay.
So the audience can help to do the feedback.
Stop sharing.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So here is the QR to the survey form. All right.
Okay. So you want everybody to do this survey and say nice things about the session, right? Okay.
Yes, say nice thing about Phil Reichert. You want Rise to invite Phil with us again next year.
Right, and then maybe I can come to Bangkok. Maybe I can come to Bangkok next year, right?
Yes, please. Yeah, please state that Rise should invite Phil to Bangkok. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. So I'm sorry. Back to the question,
please.
So
thank you.
Good. Thanks.
So this is Tamana. Maybe I'll turn on my video so it's maybe easier for you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to the whole address and the learnings that you share. I've worked in corporate innovation for a long time, and I was actually working in open innovation, and through Innovation Center, creating a lot of partnerships with startups and looking which one scale, right? It's a bit of experimentation, testing, which one goes further, which one doesn't. And then I had the learning, or kind of my insight was, in a large organization, I was working for a Fortune 500 company. I said, this process is really very slow. And what are some of the other ways that you can partner with startup with these technologies and talent? And I got more interested in the area of CVCs, so more of corporate venture capital, which becomes a different way to partner, or the venture building. And I said, would we have, more sort of scale and impact through those paths? And so the last 2 years, I've been working more in this space of venture building here.
Yes.
And I'm quite curious to hear your views, and I have obviously my sort of views on that, but I would love to hear your perspective between these different ways of taking open innovation further. One is where you partner with startups, do POCs, and then see what picks up. Then the second one is CVCs, and the third one is really venture building, where you bring in external talent, but you do it under sort of the corporate umbrella.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you can probably guess my bias on this, and so I'll characterize it as a bias, and my bias is try everything, right? My bias is that it is so cheap to try everything, and you will learn so much more by trying everything. Now, you gotta put some gates in there, and you've got to decide what are milestones and what is success, and there's a whole bunch of obvious strategic planning you got to do, but it is not obvious to me that in any given company, any one approach is going to be the best approach. And so much of a success has to do with, to some extent it's serendipity, but it's the classic idea that you make your own luck. And so if you're not out there trying it, then the chance that a brilliant entrepreneur with a brilliant technology will bump into you is reduced. So, you've got people that are out there, they're working the equation, whether it's a venture studio and you're trying to figure out, how do we build a new billion-dollar line of business? That's going to be a process of exploration. You're going to be out there, even though it's a venture studio, you're going to have to be out there thinking about, how do we get from this to a billion-dollar line of business? Or if you're a corporate venture capitalist, obviously you're going to be out there. You've got to be out there talking with other VCs, with all of the infrastructure in the ecosystem, reaching out to entrepreneurs, supporting entrepreneurs, creating events, getting out there. If you're just doing POCs, that's a way to get out there, but how do you feed the POC mechanism without having arms and legs out in the industry reaching out? If you're going to ask the business unit people, go find the right thing to try, yeah, they'll find stuff, but you're going to find a fraction of what is potentially out there. So I would assert that if you think about the budget, that the cost savings of not trying all of them is going to be trivial compared to the upside associated with the possibility of actually building a significant new line of business because of all these initiatives. So I strongly encourage you to try everything, and you'll learn. You will, people will go nuts. I mean, so as soon as there is a bad quarter, somebody's going to say, why are we spending money on this corporate venture group and we're giving money to these idiot entrepreneurs when, we're firing people in the XYZ line of business? You're going to have that. You're going to have that. So, you got to get the everybody in the organization on board that says we're investing for 10 years. We're not investing for next quarter. And if we want to be around in 10 years, we've got to put some resource into focusing on 10 years out. But if we don't put any resource on 10 years out, the chance of us being competitive in 10 years is going to be lower. So what do you guys want? So as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. I hope that resonated at some level with you. If you want me, if you want me to come over there and knock heads, I'm happy to. I'm happy to do so. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Are we done? Everybody's good?
Yeah, it's all good. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again, Bill, and thank you for the good question from Tamana. If you want to kind of like exchange contact, maybe Bill, could you give
yeah.
yeah.
I didn't at so that's my email, and that's my Twitter handle, you know, and so yes, if yeah, and I should say if you want the slides, I don't know if you want slides. Obviously, Rise will offer the video, right? You're going to post the video. Is that right, Cindy?
No.
How does that work?
We will do the summaries for the attendees, and the video only the keynote speaker. But we do the record because we will later write up the summary. Yes, so we don't have we don't allow the access to video. Yeah.
Okay, so and yes, if you want the slides, or if you have a follow-up question, or you want me to have a conversation with your CEO, you know, here's how to get to me, bill@pegasusventures.com. So happy, you know, would love to hear from you. It says we can't see your contact details. Wait, did I send it to the wrong? Oh, I didn't send it to everybody. I sent it. Okay, everyone. Okay, let's do it again, Bill.
Yes, let me help you. I sent to everyone now.
You already did? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank
All
you
right.
for your time.
Okay, now you can, now everybody's got it. All right. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Okay,
you know,
bye.
A pleasure being with you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so
Cindy,
much. Thank you again.
Cindy,
Bye.
thank you so much. It was great working with you and your team. Thank you.
Me too.
Bye.
It's my honor. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully I'll see you next year, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.